My name is Bregan Voss, and before the evacuation, I fixed reactor coils for a living, which is a skill nobody on a refugee transport needs, because refugee transports don't have reactors worth fixing, they have leased ones. Leased engines, leased water reclaimers, leased bunks. And, 3 decks below the leased bunks, a leased menagerie. That's the word the manifest used. Menagerie. Not pack, not pride, not pod. A line item under Syndrome Menagerie Concern. Contract 4471D. Intimidation and Morale Asset. 3 units, bonded. I met the units on my second week aboard the Aurelia Drift, doing what I actually still know how to do, crawling into places nobody else wants to crawl into. This time, to fix a coolant fitting on the cargo hold that housed them. The hold smelled like ozone and wet stone. 3 shapes watched me from the dark. One had scaled plates the color of an old bruise, and quills that lay flat when it was calm, and stood when it wasn't. One was long-legged and gray, built like a wolf if a wolf had been stretched on a rack and forgotten there. One clicked when it moved. Chitin over muscle. 4 eyes that tracked me like a targeting system, deciding whether I was worth the ammunition. I fixed the fitting. Then, because I had half a ration bar in my pocket and I am an old man who has never once in his life walked past something hungry, I broke it in 3 and set the pieces on the deck plate just outside the reach of their tethers. I didn't wait to see if they ate it. That would have been asking for a reaction. I just left it and went back to my actual work. The next week there was a smear on the deck where the ration bar had been, and the reptilian one, I started calling it Caro, because it made a sound like that when it saw me, had dragged its tether to the very end of its slack, toward the door, toward nothing, toward the last place it had seen a stranger act like it wasn't cargo. I want to be clear about something, because the corp made a whole doctrine out of not being clear about it. These were not animals somebody had gentled. Caro could have taken my arm off at the shoulder in less time than it takes to say so. The wolf alien Senna had a jaw built to crack ship-grade composite. The insectoid Threx could field strip a body the way I field strip a servo. They were exactly as dangerous as their contract said. I never once mistook them for pets. I just fed them. That was the whole crime. Magistrate Sella Kaur ran the labor contracts for Syndrome aboard our section of the fleet, and she ran the Triad, as everyone below decks started calling them, as her enforcement arm. When a family balked at signing a resettlement labor bond, 90-year terms, no exit clause, your children's children still paying it off on some corp-owned rock, Kaur didn't threaten them herself. She had them brought down to the cargo hold for an orientation, and she stood at a safe distance while the tethers were run out, just far enough that the holdouts got a good look at what waited for them if they kept being difficult. Nobody ever got hurt. That was never the point. The point was the look on Caro's face when it was hungry and agitated and straining at a chain, and the sound Threx made when it clicked its mandibles in sequence, deliberate, like counting. I signed my own contract the first week, same as everyone. I am not brave, and I have never pretended to be. But I kept feeding them anyway, because a scared thing being used to scare other scared things is not a policy I have ever been able to walk past either. By the 4th month, they didn't strain at their tethers when I came in. They lay down. Senna put her long gray head against my knee once, hard enough to nearly take it out from under me, and I put my hand flat on her skull the way you'd calm anything with too much muscle and too little say in its own life, and she went still under it, like something that had been waiting a long time to be touched without a purpose attached. I never told Kaur any of this. I didn't need to. She found out the way people like her always find out. A junior enforcer mentioned the old maintenance man who had a way with the assets, and she filed it as useful information rather than a problem, because in her math, a beast that trusted someone was just a beast that would come when called. She was almost right. The last of the holdouts, 41 families who still hadn't signed, mine among them in spirit if not in law, since a signature doesn't undo a conscience, were due for what Kaur called a final orientation. Not a threat this time. A demonstration. She'd decided to run the Triad loose in the public courtyard outside the ration hall, no tethers, to show good faith compliance training, which meant, watch what obeys me completely, and understand that the alternative is standing where it's aimed. I was called down along with everyone else, ostensibly to check the courtyard's environmental seals. I think, now, that Kaur wanted me there specifically. I think she wanted the man who fed her weapons to watch her prove they were still weapons. She released the restraints herself, in front of maybe 60 refugees and a dozen of her own enforcers, and gave the recall command, a short, ugly word she'd trained them on with a shock collar none of us were supposed to know about. Caro came off the platform fast, plates up, quills standing, exactly the shape of the thing on the manifest. 60 people flinched as one. Cor smiled, because that flinch was the whole product she was selling. Caro didn't stop at the crowd. It came straight through them, past the families it was supposed to be terrorizing, and put its head against my chest hard enough to sit me down on the deck plating. Senna was a half step behind it, already between me and the enforcers, low and flat, and utterly silent, which is worse than a growl. Threx came last, climbed the maintenance strut behind me, and stopped, and simply watched Cor the way you'd watch something you were deciding whether to bother with. Cor gave the recall command again, louder. The collar should have dropped all three of them where they stood. Nothing happened, and I understood, sitting on the deck with 60 pounds of armored reptile leaning into my ribs, that somewhere in the last 4 months, on his own schedule, on a piece of black market maintenance gear I'd never admit to installing, I had quietly rerouted a control relay I wasn't supposed to have access to. I hadn't planned this moment. I'd planned, on some slow Tuesday with a service panel open and 3 tired animals watching me work, that no one was ever again going to hold a switch over them without at least one honest person's hand also on the wire. Korger tried the command a 3rd time in front of her own enforcers, and that 3rd failure is the one that mattered, because a magistrate who cannot make her own weapon answer her, in front of the people she governs by fear of that weapon, has just publicly run out of leverage. I watched it land on her face, not fear, something worse for her purposes, doubt, spreading through 60 witnesses at once. "They're not signaling to the caller anymore," I said, from the deck, because someone had to say it plainly. "They're signaling to me. That's not a malfunction. That's a contract they wrote themselves." One of her own enforcers, a young man named Pharaoh, who'd been decent to us in small ways nobody logs, said it out loud before Cor could stop him. "No longer inventory." It caught, the way a phrase catches when it's true, and everyone's been waiting for someone else to say it first. By the time the 41 families filed out of that courtyard, refugees who'd never spoken to each other were repeating it back and forth like a password. No longer inventory. Cor rescinded the demonstration order, rescinded the labor bonds inside the week. Not from decency, I think, but because a magistrate whose enforcement asset defects on camera in front of 60 witnesses has a career problem, and problems like that get solved quietly and fast. She was reassigned off the Aurelia Drift before the next docking cycle. I never saw her again, and I can't say I tried. Caro still meets me at the coolant fitting some evenings, quills flat, waiting for whatever's left of my ration. Senna sleeps across the maintenance corridor most nights, which means nobody sleeps in that corridor without her permission anymore, mine included. Threx has taken to riding the overhead struts when I do rounds, 4 eyes tracking every stranger who gets too close to me, and I have stopped pretending that isn't exactly what it looks like. We are still, on paper, 3 decks of refugees and a leased predator triad aboard a corp transport. But nobody down here calls it a menagerie anymore. My name is Bregan Voss. I fix things nobody else wants to crawl into, and 3 of the most dangerous animals in this fleet decided, on their own terms, that I was one of theirs to keep. I never once had to prove it. I just never stopped feeding what was hungry, and it turned out that was the entire mechanism all along.